webcast this year. I get to do that because Canada made three key strategic decisions. Canada decided to be the third country to put a satellite into space to better understand how satellites could enable telecommunications across our country. And as a result of that, on a long journey, today, MDA Space is a world leader in digital low Earth orbit communication satellite constellations. Canada also decided to develop synthetic aperture radar, or SAR satellites, to monitor our country and our coastlines. And today, MDA Space is the world leader in broad area SAR satellites globally, based on the legacy RadarSat heritage. And thirdly, Canada decided to contribute space robotics, initially in the form of Canadarm to the Space Shuttle program, and subsequently to the International Space Station, where it has been operating for 25 years. And now MDA Space is working on the third generation of the Canadarm for the Moon, work that has enabled us to launch our own commercial product line, MDA Skymaker, to the global space market. These moves by Canada were critical, and they established Canada as a space leader in civil and military space capability, and they gave Canada relevance, which was generated via contributions to the Allied team, which added to Canada's sovereignty and geopolitical power. Today's space capability is increasingly important in military operations and is increasingly important to everyday civilian life and must therefore be protected and defended. But in my opinion, Canada has fallen behind from a military space capability perspective and is not engaging its industrial base effectively. As a result, our relevance in a rapidly changing geopolitical world is declining, and along with it, our ability to protect and defend Canadians from a space perspective. Our single largest key challenge and our single largest opportunity is to reverse this trend, is to take a whole of Canada approach to defense military capability delivery. To achieve this, there are several things we urgently need to do. First, we must establish a classified dialogue between the Defense Department and the industrial base on the true threats in space and the future military need. Military space activity occurs at the top secret level of security and above, and the military and industry must be able to talk about the threat and talk about the capability requirements well in advance of procurement and well in advance of operational need. Today, we cannot do that. And as a result, industry cannot be prepared to innovate and have defense solutions ready for procurement and operational need when procurement suddenly appear decades later. Second, we must establish a commercial partnership between defense and industry. The Canadian Forces continue to be stuck in a procurement pattern from the past, ensuring that the Canadian Forces own and operate all defense space capability themselves. Today, many nations, including the United States Department of Defense and the United Kingdom, have established a polity of build only what you cannot buy as a service, with the intent to purchase vast amounts of space-based Earth observation data, communication services, launch services, and other space operational support, including counterspace, as a service from industry. Canada must start to do this, or they will significantly delay the establishment of critical military capability while waiting for their procurement processes to complete. It is faster and cheaper, in many cases, to procure via commercial service from industry, and it leverages a deep knowledge base that does not historically exist inside the Canadian Forces. Third, Canada must focus on engaging the Canadian space industrial base, which is world-leading, to purchase technology and services in support of space operations and defense of the country. Interoperability and interdependency with the United States is important, especially in combined operations such as NORAD, but Canada must do this in a manner that engages the domestic industrial base. In doing this, Canada will ensure sovereignty, economic stability, and reestablish our relevance and geopolitical power that comes from contributing capability to a combined team. All nations engage their domestic industrial base on defense and security as a first priority, and Canada needs to do the same. Global fairness is not required. It is not conducted in other nations and results in Canada negotiating with itself on the global stage. And lastly, we need to move faster. We are missing opportunity. As an example, you'll hear from Telesat today, Canada needs communications in the north. Canada has identified procurement spend to purchase space capability for communications in the north circa 2038. Meanwhile, Telesat will launch a global communication capability with satellites built by MDA Space in 2027. If we had a conversation today, it could potentially be configured to deliver military communications in the Arctic a decade faster as a commercial service. A decade faster. We must think like this. We must start to behave like the rest of the Western world about the establishment of military space capability through a whole-of-Canada approach. Thank you for the opportunity.
Mr. Gallant, 5 minutes, please.
Bonjour à vous tous et toutes. Merci.
Good day, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to be among you today.
Solutions are an essential part of Canada's defense strategy, contributing directly or indirectly to virtually all defense operations. That is why the team at Space Canada, an organization that represents the Canadian space ecosystem, is so pleased to see this committee undertake this study of Canada's space defense. Chair and members of the House of Commons Standing Committee on National Defence, thank you for undertaking this study, and thank you for inviting Space Canada to be a part of this exercise. Our organization represents over 80 Canadian space innovators who collectively play an essential role in protecting the environment and combating climate change, bridging the digital divide, enabling humanity to explore beyond our planet, and safeguarding Canada's security and sovereignty. Indeed, space capabilities connect Canada's personnel when operating at home and around the world. They provide intelligence and information vital to decision-making and allow Canada to contribute to the collective defense of North America and internationally with our NATO allies. The Canadian space sector contributes nearly $3 billion to the Canadian economy every year, sustaining thousands of jobs, largely in STEM, that pay on average 64% more than the Canadian average and 32% more than other jobs in the aerospace sector. Moreover, the space sector is very R&D intensive with over $500 million of annual investment. This is 18 times higher than other manufacturing sectors. The global space sector is projected to grow exponentially between now and 2040, estimated to reach over $1 trillion a year. Les capacités spatiales procureront des...
Space capabilities will deliver operational benefits for Canada's defense, will allow Canada to contribute those capabilities to continental and collective security through existing NORAD and NATO commitments, and will strengthen Canada's space industrial base. Developing solutions in Canada gives Canada priority access to innovation, sustains Canada's technological advantage, and has the potential to deliver dual-use spin-off technologies for commercial export growth and increases opportunities for partners with our allies and partners. It is for these reasons that Canada should accelerate the delivery of identified space defense programs, engage directly with Canada's space innovators, expand defense research and development programs, and establish a National Space Council to coordinate space priorities across the Government of Canada.
Canada is a leader in space. The competition is getting tougher. Canada's space industry risks being left behind in the face of the increasingly competitive global landscape at a time when space capabilities have never been more important or strategic. Space Canada is therefore emphatically supportive of the Government of Canada's recent commitment in the tabled budget to create a National Space Council. Inspired by the U.S. example, a National Space Council will deliver a whole-of-government approach to space. It should be an internal government body led by ministers who meet at least biannually, if not quarterly, to, amongst other things, undertake a review of space systems procurement, including a benchmarking study to compare how other nations employ rapid procurement practices and serve as key customers for innovative space technologies, de moderniser le cadre réglementaire.
To modernize the space regulatory framework that builds on the 2023 consultation by the Canadian Space Agency, leveraging Canada's space industrial base with its world-class capabilities, workforce, innovation, and its track record of delivery. and guide the development and implementation of a whole of government, national, civil, defense, and commercial space policy. This would position Canada at the forefront of the new space economy and deliver associated economic, social, environmental, defense, and national security benefits.
Further discussing the pivotal role space plays in securing Canada's defense and security with you all today. Encore une fois, merci beaucoup pour l'invitation.
Thank you, Mr. Gallant. Madame Beck, 5 minutes, please.
So good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting Telesat to participate today. Merci pour l'invitation aujourd'hui.
Thank you for the invitation. My name is Michelle Beck. I am Vice President of Sales at Telesat, and I'm here with Stephen Hampton, Director of Public Policy and Strategic Accounts.
And most innovative satellite operators, operating for over 55 years from our headquarters in Ottawa. As a proud Canadian company, we play a central role in Canada's commercial and defense connectivity infrastructure. Today, we connect over 7 million households to high-definition television, provide broadband and other lifeline services to rural, remote, and Indigenous communities, and deliver mission-critical services to Canada's national security and public safety community. And we offer these same types of services all around the world. This study comes at a pivotal time for Canada and our sector. There is a global high-stakes space race underway, and it is critical to Canada's sovereignty and national security. Critical sovereign communication, whether in air, at sea, or on the ground, is fundamental to Canada's national security and that of our allies. And this can only be achieved through advanced satellite communications networks. Specifically, global, ubiquitous, interoperable satellite communications networks that are not only sovereign and secure, but that are also allied by design and capable of delivering joint allied operations in key regions like the Arctic and the Indo-Pacific. And that's why we've undertaken the most ambitious and innovative project in our proud history, a $6 billion state-of-the-art LEO satellite constellation known as Telesat Lightspeed. It will initially consist of nearly 200 highly advanced satellites and will deliver affordable, secure, and resilient fiber-like broadband connectivity and enable 5G everywhere on Earth, including all of Canada and the Arctic. It's the largest space program ever conceived in Canada and will shape the domestic space sector for decades to come. Telesat Lightspeed will be designed, manufactured, and operated in Canada. Telesat Lightspeed is a true Canadian flagship program. It will help bridge the global digital divide, create and sustain thousands of high-quality jobs in Canada, and spur domestic innovation, investment, and exports, and ensure that Canada is at the forefront of the rapidly growing and highly strategic new space economy. Today's global defense landscape is changing rapidly, both on Earth and in space, driven by climate change, new geopolitical dynamics, emerging technologies, and rising security threats to our national sovereignty. La défense de notre pays et de nos zones géographiques stratégiques.
The defense of Canada and our strategic geographic zones like the Arctic are more important than ever. To adapt to these changes, governments throughout the world focus increasingly on the role that space plays in their defense infrastructure. The space industry on the global level has radically changed since the beginning of the century, becoming more dynamic, innovative, and more important.
Traditionally, defense projects in space were directed and developed exclusively by government. The pace of technological change was incremental, oftentimes bogged down by procurement processes, cost overruns, and a fundamental lack of urgency. Today, a new space race is emerging with commercial companies developing space-based assets and capabilities both for commercial and defense purposes. Over the past several years, we have seen generational leaps in technological capabilities, with many calling this sea change the transformation from old space to new. As Canada looks toward NORAD modernization and delivering the most advanced technology to its armed forces, it should follow the lead set by the US, the UK, and other countries around the world that have moved beyond the legacy approach of exclusively relying on dedicated government-owned and operated defense systems to meet accelerating threats. Instead, these governments are working hand in glove with their domestic private sector, leveraging significant commercial investments made in cutting-edge allied by design capabilities, and are integrating these space-based assets into their defense systems. Canada is a world leader in satellite communications. We have clear competitive advantage, and it should be exploited to its fullest. The Government of Canada should look to partner with the space sector to rapidly ensure that the Canadian Armed Forces and our allies have access to the most cutting-edge technologies like Telesat Lightspeed. Merci encore une fois pour le...
Thank you once again for the opportunity to participate in your meetings, and we'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Ms. Gallant, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so the first questions will be for MDA through you. Since the revelation of Putin's willingness to use nuclear weaponization of space, has any entity from the federal government approached you to discuss this?
To discuss that topic? No. No one has approached us to discuss that topic. Various intelligence and security agencies from the federal government do approach us and work with us on national security issues and our ability to ensure that we have very secure operations, both domestically and in orbit. But on that topic, no.
What about contacts you may have in the United States? Has anyone shared anything with you on this topic?
No, I think in general, like people might generally talk about those things in an unclassified manner at conferences and the like, but no.
How vulnerable are satellites and infrastructure relying on satellites with potential nuclear explosion in low Earth orbit?
I think that satellites are susceptible to any form of explosion in orbit. I think that most nations are working hard to ensure that we don't do that. I think that space and counter space, efforts in counter space, there's lots of bluster that's out there, but I think that if folks go around exploding things in orbit, that it does just as much harm to their own assets as it would to an adversary because of the debris that would be created from that's in those orbital paths. You risk just as much your own operations as the next guy. So I think people, bluster a fair bit on these topics, but in general, the business of messing around with somebody else's satellite capability would be more subtle than causing explosions.
What should the federal government do to protect satellites from this new threat on the horizon?
I think that in general, the Canadian forces with their space operations need to continue to work very effectively with their allies. It seems that is the case and that it is increasing. There is also the introduction of what's called a commercial integration cell that will occur in Canada that also exists in the United States as an example, whereby those commercial entities that operate significant military capability, not military capability, but space capability like MDA or Telesat, who are here today, would work weekly, regularly, with the military on coordinating our space activities and ensuring that we're mutually aware of threats and taking actions ourselves and with allies to be able to protect those threats.
Okay, in the Financial Times, a leaked U.S. report indicated that China is developing a sophisticated cyber weapon that deny, control, and hijack foreign satellites. So potentially, China could take over satellites and gather data without our knowledge, or rendering them useless by disabling us access. From your expertise, how credible is this a threat to Canadian national security, if indeed it does persist?
Mm-hmm. In my remarks, I made the comment about the importance of us getting through the process of security clearances so that Canadian industry could engage properly with the Department of Defense about the highly classified nature of the threats that are going on in space. So I would have limited awareness of that because we have spent over 3 years engaging with the Government of Canada to try to get the necessary security clearances of government personnel and appropriate industry personnel so that we could have conversations to discuss the types of topics that you are mentioning. That will come soon someday, but the bureaucracy is very bogged down in their ability to get the necessary clearances so that we can have these conversations. However, I do think it's a highly plausible situation whereby, in terms of just general knowledge of electronic warfare measures and the ability to jam and interfere with electronic signals, that it would make sense that people would have capability to be able to interfere with satellites, and we definitely pay attention to that when we build and protect them today.
With respect to RadarSat additions, what progress are you aware of that's being made in the adding more satellites to the constellation?
RadarSat Constellation mission has 3 satellites in it. MDA built those and launched them in June of 2019. The government, as of last October, has announced an additional program called RadarSat Plus, where as a minimum there will be one additional satellite will be procured to add to that constellation to provide resiliency and start the initiating studies to be able to plan the replacement of RadarSat Constellation to ensure continuity. In addition, firms like MDA, back to my comments on collaborating commercially, MDA has invested over $400 million over the last few years to build Chorus, our 4th generation of RadarSat-capable satellites, which is will be owned and operated by MDA and would provide an additional commercial service that, if the government wanted to leverage that in partnership with industry, they could do so as well to provide additional resiliency to Canada's radar surveillance capability.
Have you seen any movement on the part of the federal government to start moving this ahead?
The RadarSat Plus procurement, yes. Talking to us about procurement of commercial services, not yet.
Okay. For Telesat, there have been incidents where airline Wi-Fi was used in an attempt to hack into avionics so they could take control of the aircraft. How much of the price for an airline in-air Wi-Fi service goes to cybersecurity, and is Telesat, has it ever been attacked by such a cyber incident?
That's an important question. Unfortunately, Ms. Gallant has not left you any time to answer it, but hopefully you can circle back in on that. Ms. Lambropoulos, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to begin by thanking our witnesses for being here to answer questions today. And I'll start with Mr. Greenlee. You spoke a little bit about interoperability, and we've heard this before, even in previous studies. And I'm wondering what specific recommendations you could give the Government of Canada in order to help it promote its own Made in Canada equipment and technology in order to ensure that we're benefiting Canadian companies.
I think the important thing is to make sure we have interoperability in terms of the overall capability, not necessary. That allows us to therefore use Canadian systems and solutions and then contribute. For example, on Sapphire, which is a space surveillance satellite that was built by MDA Space, and we are contracted to operate it. D&D contributes on a daily basis imagery in terms of what the satellites are doing in space as part of the overall picture in an interoperable way. Our radar satellites imagery, we contribute that through D&D down into the United States. So these types of mechanisms, and then of course the Telesat example that we used today, could contribute all kinds of communications capabilities. So we want to be able to make sure that our capability and our procedures are interoperable, but that the technical solutions come from Canadian industry in terms of building them and operating them in support of Department of National Defence.
And so are you of the opinion that Canada is already doing a good job at making sure that that's happening, or is there something more we could do to help promote what's being made in Canada?
We have had some good experience of doing this in the past. I think that there is a worry bead that's out there right now. I think that if we look at domestic, like Army, Navy, Air Force type military activity right now, that there seems to be a bit of a push to make sure that interoperability and interexchangeability with the United States means that we use a bit more of the U.S. systems. We're starting to see that on several procurements right now. We would not want to see that transition into space. We would want to see us continuing to leverage our space capability and be interoperable using Canadian systems, not going and starting to procure American ones.
Okay, and I guess I'm going to open the floor to all of the witnesses for this next question. The Minister of National Defence came before our committee and noted that Canada's new defence policy is also an industrial policy. And earlier this year at the Aerospace on the Hill, the Minister Champagne actually mentioned an aerospace strategy that would eventually come into play and that the government is starting to consider. What role do you think that your industry could play in this, and how do you think that this strategy would look for the companies represented here today?
Go ahead, Michelle.
How would you contribute to this strategy?
Yes, so thank you. So we were quite pleased, actually, to see the new defense policy being issued, and we're actually quite excited by the fact that the government recognizes the importance of space as well to the space defense policy. You know, the industry is innovating at a very fast pace, making services, technologies, capabilities available faster at a lower price point with probably greater capabilities than governments can move. And so we feel that from a supply perspective, we should be relied upon. We've got expertise that we have been developing for the past 55 years in the sector, and we can provide guidance, consultative services, insight in terms of these capabilities. And so we welcome the opportunity to work hand in glove with the government to advance these types of services and capabilities.
Mr. Gallant?
Maybe I'll go next. Yeah, thank you. For the defense policy review, I just want to echo the comments of Michelle that as an industry, we were very excited to see the way in which space is being talked about in the defense policy update, and very happy to see that there's a clear recognition of the importance of space to national defense and security. In terms of the strategy, the defense policy update, if you will, being an industrial sort of industrial plan, it isn't necessarily as reflected in the written words of the plan, but we can I can certainly attest that in discussions with the department and even more specifically with the minister, that clearly is the intent. So that is certainly something that is supported. The idea that the defense policy update will be a way in which we can further engage and develop the industrial base for space would be we think important. In terms of having an aerospace strategy, of course, on paper, the idea of having a strategy and a robust exercise to develop it is certainly something that makes sense. One flag that we certainly would have is that space often risks being sort of lost in the shuffle, an afterthought, or just not as much of a priority when it's lumped in with the sort of general term of aerospace. So that would certainly be a flag and a worry of industry.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there.
Not a problem.
Space gets risk of getting lost in space. That was really bad. Madame Normandine, 6 minutes, please.
Merci. Thank you very much. Thank you to the witnesses. I'll start with a question for you, Mr. Gallant. You mentioned that Canada should expedite the development of identified space programs. What exactly does this mean, and what does that actually mean in actual fact? To answer in simple terms, we're talking about procurement that needs to be faster. And perhaps I'm speaking beyond our organization, but when it has to do with defense procurement, purely defense procurement, we're already hearing the complaint that it's too slow. Now, with respect to the space sector, an additional challenge is the fact that innovation is happening at such a quick quick clip. If it takes a decade to go from start to finish of a procurement process for a service or a space product, then innovation means that it may not be useful anymore. Or other countries and other individuals will have systems that have surpassed the ones that we've procured. Thank you very much. Question for you, Madam Beck. In your testimony, you mentioned that Canada has a clear competitive advantage with respect to other countries. In what way is Canada competitive? In the sense that we do know we don't have a launching pad for satellites, etc. What does Canada have as an advantage? The advantage for Canada has to do more with the telecommunications industry. For 50 years now, we've existed. We've been operating satellites for government and for the commercial industry at the same time. We are currently developing a constellation of satellites in low Earth orbit. This is a constellation that provides services that are just incomparable to the services we used to offer. Geostationary satellites, that is. So it's brand new. We have capabilities, rather. We offer very secure, resilient, low latency services that can be of use to government for national defense to support their operations, not just here in Canada, but throughout the world. This is a global constellation. So we have the capacity that's already in-house, and we are developing it further in the constellation. And that really gives us a competitive strength when you look at offering those services directly here in Canada. Thank you very much. I understand you're speaking about Telesat Lightspeed. Perhaps you could reassure us a little bit about that, because I know the Globe and Mail last year indicated that Telesat Standards and Poor's rating had dropped because there was some issue as to equity or loans. This was about a year ago. Some analysts at Standards and Poor's were saying that perhaps Telesat had put all its eggs in the same basket. Well, what can you tell us? Where are we at a year later, financially and in terms of the company's vitality?
Perfect. Thank you for the question. So in August of last year, we announced that we'd entered into a contract with MDA Space to build 198 satellites. We have funding arrangements in place to be fully funded. We are, since August, we've hired over almost 150 people. We're investing and looking to do significantly more this year. We're investing tens of millions of dollars, and I think our CapEx guidance for this year is almost $1.4 billion. So we are off to the races and very excited about the future. And I think Michelle's spoken to it, and Brian and Mike. The space sector is exploding around the world, and having a global low latency broadband network truly is a differentiator. And for customers here in Canada, but all around the world, we're hearing we need this, we need this, we need this. So we're very excited and very optimistic about the future.
Merci beaucoup. Et en une minute,
Thank you very much. And in 1 minute, could you give us an idea of the advancements of things with respect to Lightspeed and what the timelines are?
Yeah, so right now we'll start launching satellites in mid-2026. We'll enter global service towards the end of 2027, and then we'll continue adding satellites from there. So that's the timeline.
merci. Je prendrais peut-être.
I'll take those 40 seconds that I still have in the next round.
Madame Madsen, 6 minutes.
Thank you all for attending today. A lot of you have spoken about this incredible opportunity for Canadian jobs. I did want to ask, of course, though, in terms of the jobs that are currently held through MDA, Unifor has been on strike since April 8th, and they are incredibly proud to be part of that production of those satellites, putting them into orbit. Can you talk to us, though, about the fact that MDA won't meet their demands for a cost of living adjustment, pension, a fair pension? Can you talk to us about what you're doing, what steps you're taking to get back to that table and to provide those incredible workers and those incredible jobs, the people that do them with what they're asking?
MDA Space has a great workforce. We're up over 3,000 people now. We had about 1,700 people when I started 6 years ago. We crossed the 3,000 line this year. We hired 900 people last year. We'll hire over 1,000 people this year. So certainly the growth in space is turning into good jobs. We have a history as a company of being able to work with all kinds of employees, both represented and non-represented employees. And we have a very good, I feel, human resources framework for being able to do that in terms of total compensation, in terms of our salaries that we get and our benefits programs, which are actually very, very good. I won't comment specifically on an active negotiation, but we do look forward. We do respect, certainly, the represented workers' desire to be able to go on strike and be able to express themselves that way as part of the process of dealing with represented workers. And we're optimistic that we'll come to a solution here as we go through the next few weeks.
Fair enough. One of the things that New Democrats have done recently was our motion on Palestine, which included ending military exports to Israel. Of course, many Canadian civil organizations have tried to track and report on Canada's arms export, our arms trade regime. A lot of what we export is towards Israel's space program. Have you received anything from the government, and I think I'll take that to Mr. Greenlee and Ms. Beck, in terms of what the government promised that the House would issue the notice to exporters and the ending of those exports? If you have any indication or if you've received any communications from government, if you have any connection with that, I'm just curious about progress on that motion.
For me personally, in terms of we have export control teams in the company that deal directly with the government every day. Anything we export has to have the appropriate export permits from the government of Canada. And so that interface is there. I don't see all that daily traffic, so I just honestly can't answer. I have not personally seen anything, but I wouldn't normally. The export control teams would see that.
Is this something that you can report back to the committee so that we can see that if the government is following through on their commitments on that?
Could certainly go and ask, certainly, yeah.
Okay. And from you, Ms. Beck, as well?
Yeah, likewise. We do have an export control working group as well at Telesat, but to our knowledge, and I just checked with Mr. Hampton, we haven't heard of anything coming into the company, but okay. We'll take an undertaking and get back to you.
Thank you very much. One of the things, too, that was mentioned a couple times, and I'm curious, the relationship that we have with the United States in terms of that space domain has been strained at times because of the Americans' policies on foreign entities, other national, like Canadian companies, for example, accessing what the infrastructure that they have, technologies they have. And I ask this in terms of maybe some of the commentary around the National Space Council. Is that something that you believe that council could help to negotiate, or do you have any other recommendations in terms of that limit on the barriers that mainly the U.S. government, because they are so dominant in this field, have in terms of Canadian participation, sharing of data, that sort of thing?
Just real quick from me, we do have a lot of mechanisms to be able to work with the United States, and often we just have to be able to have the fortitude to exercise them, to be able to stick up for Canadian interests, and in our negotiations with the United States, to be able to stick up for Canadian built systems in combined force and combined government solutions. So I think that that we can do that. I think that the National Space Council could certainly help. I'm sure Brian would have something to say about that.
Thank you, Mike. If I may add, whether you think that you, in the general term, whether you think that we need to sort of compete with the U.S. and try to put our elbows up when it comes to our space sector, or you think that we need to collaborate more with the U.S., a National Space Council will help us do that. A National Space Council will help us get organized, obviously making sure that we can be as nimble as possible, as holistic as possible. And if I may, from the previous question that I didn't have time to completely finish, an aerospace strategy would make it that my worry would make it that it would be sort of a siloed strategy, meaning that perhaps it's ISED that's focused on the strategy, where I think when it comes to space, we really need a whole of government strategy that embodies the way in which other departments can play a role and what space can do for other departments. So a National Space Council will help us have that holistic approach that we need to be able to be a big player on the international stage for all the reasons already discussed as to why space is important. We think that makes a lot of sense. And then when it comes to collaborating with the U.S., the U.S. wants countries, especially allied countries, to step up and sort of, for the lack of a better way of describing it, get their act together. And they created a National Space Council to coordinate their efforts. And I think it would be very well received from a collaboration point of view if we did the same.
Unfortunately, again, Mr. Gallant, I apologize for having to cut you off again. Colleagues, we got 15 minutes and 25 minutes worth of questions. This math doesn't work. So 3 minutes each, and Ms. Normandin, 2 minutes. Mr. Kelly.
Thanks. Okay. I'd like to start, Mr. Greenlee, just by unpacking a little bit of your testimony in your opening round and in response to some of the questions from Mrs. Gallant. You said that you were somewhat dismissive of the threat of a nuclear explosion in space under the, I guess, the thought that any such event disrupts all sides and that it's not possible to just target an adversary. But we've ignored you characterize it as the bluster of certain people, and we're talking about the bluster of Putin. We've ignored his bluster at our own peril. He has a proven track record of comfort with war of attrition, where he sacrifices his own equipment and his own people's lives. So is there what would be a prudent defense response? I think we've got to do better than just hope that such an event doesn't take place.
To be honest, I think that was me expressing my personal opinions before. I think that the topic that we're into here is certainly one for the military. My previous comments about us needing to make sure that we get the appropriate clearances so that industry and the military can collaboratively talk about these things is essential. And I don't feel I would be informed enough at this time.
Okay, good. Now that takes us to the first ask in your response so the absence of security clearance, does that leave you with more or less just being able to, where would you get your information if you don't have that security clearance?
You're left with unclassified information that the general public would have from the media or participation in conferences. Often what happens with security clearances is that the system has been established whereby if you have a contract whereby you need to be secure, then you can get the appropriate clearance. However, in this case, we need to have the clearances so we can have the conversations to develop the capabilities to then get the contract, and the government has to do things differently.
Okay. So how will Canada ensure domain awareness in the Arctic when RadarSat reaches its end of life? We've had testimony at this committee and an Auditor General report that show there's a gap coming. How can we prevent this coverage gap?
I think that RadarSat Plus will help by adding additional satellite capability into the constellation. So you're going to get some resiliency from that, leveraging commercial services. Which
if I may, I've only got a really short time left.
Sorry.
What about non-maritime domain awareness? Does your company, or is there technology available that can give us? We've heard of the huge gaps in awareness in the Arctic.
Right.
Are there solutions at hand commercially?
Yes, there are solutions for non-maritime domain awareness, yes. Our Cora system, for example, which combines what's called C-band and X-band, two different types of synthetic aperture radar, greatly enhances our capability to do non-maritime domain awareness.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Collins, 3 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I'll start with Mr. Gallant, if I could. Mr. Gallant, you talked about the high wages and the amount of R&D in the sector. What recommendations do you have for the Government of Canada as it relates to attracting and retaining top talent? So supports for colleges and universities, immigration policies that might help us ensure that the labor force that you require in the short, medium, long term is there for the companies that are driving innovation here in Canada.
Thank you for the question. Those are certainly ways in which those are certainly policies in which we could be able to help ensure we have the strong workforce needed. But two things. First, one is we need to make sure that we've chosen this to be a priority sector for us. There's immense growth projected for the next few decades in space, but if we sort of don't again get our act together and make sure that we're set up to seize those opportunities, we may not have to worry about the workforce as much. And then the second thing I would say, National Space Council could help us with the first thing mentioned, and then my next thing would be that ensuring that we have consistent investment in space. As you can imagine, in the past it's been very sort of peaks and valleys when it comes to major projects and investments in space, and I won't belabor that point. It's pretty evident. It's hard to keep a workforce, recruit it, retain it, and keep it as productive as possible when you have those sort of peaks and valleys that affect our large space companies, but also the SMEs in the ecosystem as well.
Thank you for that. Ms. Beck, we've heard testimony in this meeting and others that with increasing competition, there'll be more congestion in space, and I think the Government of Canada needs to develop some policies as it relates to being a responsible actor in this space. What policies or recommendations should we adopt as it relates to ensuring that the Canadian companies that we're working with are responsible actors in space? And I guess my next question would be, what steps should we take to ensure that we're protecting the infrastructure that you have in the Earth's orbit?
Thank you. So I think the Space Council certainly can help develop the right policies to ensure that space remains available, that it remains a protected area, and that it identifies regulations for at least Canadian companies to operate in and abide by those specific regulations. Today we work through ICED, we work through CSA in terms of the regulation, but certainly a Space Council would actually bring that and would bring together, I think, sort of the global interests as well to ensure that space remains secure, available.
Thank you, Mr. Collins, unfortunately. Madame Normandin, 1 minute plus 30 seconds.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. A question for Mr. Greenlee. You have an impressive track record in defense. You talked about challenges to the defense industry, meaning that it's difficult to produce well-adapted goods in this field. People were talking about dual use. Could you tell us, does dual use mean that we can be quicker in terms of procurement, or does it mean that the specificity of a military needs, let's say, slow things down on the civil side? Can you tell us about the interaction between civil and military in space? Can you give us an idea about that?
I think that dual-use technologies would mean that they can be used for both civil and military purposes. We're increasingly seeing the opportunities for dual use. In space, we've talked about Earth observation, which we use for climate change, for example, or climate detection, or immigration detection, or deforestation detection, also being the same technology we use to detect things for military operations. Telesat's example of providing high-speed communications for civil purposes can be absolutely reused for military purposes. Work that we do on servicing spacecraft with robotics to be able to tend to and service satellites could also be used for military purposes someday in satellites. So the same technology can be used for both. I think the important thing is that in military procurement, recognizing what the core capability is and that they can benefit from dual use of civilian capability, we don't have to perfectly customize everything for military purposes every time.
Dean, 1 minute. Ms. Matheson.
Minute. So throughout the Cold War, the International Space Station represented a shared project. It brought the world together in difficult times. Throughout the Apollo-Soyuz project, we saw it help in terms of cooperation and throughout that Cold War détente. So as we now are seemingly moving away from the International Space Station towards that commercialization of a space domain, what are the wider implications that would have on diplomacy, and what can we do to increase or ease that tension that we feel here on the ground up in space?
I think that in the commercial space stations, they're going to be very international. So a lot of different countries are going to want to get access to those. And so they'll be like, large commercial collaborative industrial parks. But if we look at the moon on the Artemis program, we've had 36 countries now. We had 6 countries collaborate on the International Space Station. The Artemis Accords, we now have had 36 countries sign up with the United States to collaborate on the moon. And so the actual level of geopolitical collaboration on the next hardest problem, it used to be the hard problem was to have the space station. Now the hard problem to go and live and work on the moon. And the amount of participation globally now to have 36 countries working together is tremendous. We also have another group.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave the answer there. Thank you. Mr. Bazan, 3 minutes.
Thanks to our witnesses for being here. Mr. Greenlee, you talked about the Chorus satellite constellation. That's in service already?
Sorry, no, that's in development. It'll be launched in the fourth quarter of 2025.
Okay, and it's commercially available when it does launch?
Yes.
It's considered an ISR platform?
Yes.
Who would be able to use it outside of the government of Canada if it's an ISR?
We will have customers on our current RadarSat 2, which we own and operate. We would have customers in 25 countries around the world. So defense and intelligence agencies around the world would contract us to provide them with surveillance.
Would that include near peer and adversarial nations?
It includes countries that we have export permits from the government of Canada to deliver a service to.
Okay. So that would be screened, and there's a safety check there.
Absolutely, all the time. Affairs. Yep, and it changes based on the geopolitical situation.
Okay. Both of you have talked about security clearances, both from Telesat and from MDA. Is the government chronically overclassifying information to make it difficult for Canadians and for Canadian industry to understand the needs and threats that we're facing?
No, I don't think so. I think that the level of classification of information is appropriate. It's just making sure that the people that need access to that are cleared and approved.
But that also provides more of a bureaucratic slowdown and red tape to get people cleared in a timely manner, which we hear over and over again, that not just Canadian, not just industry representatives, but also people that work for the government of Canada, including the Canadian Armed Forces, can't get their security clearances. Ms. Beck.
So I think in some instances there could be more open dialogue with the parties that are supplying the services, and if it's just shared on a need-to-know basis, it would facilitate an exchange.
The problem with that is that whenever the government has a need-to-know basis, they always determine that you don't need to know. That's the easy way out. So my question then comes down to is you both have got national defense contracts already. How was those security clearances that you had for those projects not continued forward on future contracts?
So we do have. So we were asked to get security clearances 2 years ago, and they were actually fast-tracked for Telesat. We believe it was never indicated why we needed these top security clearances. we were told that we would be consulted on just shortly. That consultation never came. We're still waiting on the sharing of information. We believe that it was associated with the creation of the commercial integration cell activity work that is about to launch, frankly. So we do have clearances, and we're waiting actually to have these very open dialogues, exchanges of information pertaining to the security, at least of satellite communications aspects.
Thank you, Mr. Bazan. Final 3 minutes, Mr. Fillmore.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to the witnesses. Time has become short, so we're going to go a little quickly here. Mr. Greenlee, it's nice to see you again. In your limited time in your opening statement, you didn't have really much time for detail to go into what you said about this notion of global fairness and Canada seeming to be negotiating with itself. I wonder if you could just take a little bit of time to expand on it.
It's a regular pattern internationally whereby countries, especially on defense and security issues, will leverage their domestic industrial base from a sovereignty and security perspective. As a result of this, they don't worry themselves with making sure that they have international competition and that other countries' firms can come in and compete. It is very natural to be able to say that you want to work with Canadian domiciled companies, for example, to be able to deal with defense and security issues as a matter of first priority. So, for example, if Canada was going to get communications, they wouldn't use like Starlink or maybe OneWeb, which would be American or European based. They would work with Telesat once it's operational because it's Canadian based, as an example, for a military purpose. It's very natural for countries to do that. And so often Canada has a view, it would appear, on defense procurement that it's important to have global, open and fair competition, which allows equal fairness to Canadian firms and international firms on defense and security issues. Canada tends to be a bit unique in that regard. Other countries don't worry about that. And so that's what I meant by Canada negotiating with itself.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Gallant, nice to see you again. I wonder if you could talk about how industry in Canada is doing relative to industry in our allies and partner countries. And if you could think about framing your answer in terms of recommendations, what can government be doing to ensure Canada is keeping up and not lagging?
I won't repeat everything that we discussed today because I think a lot of the conversation regarding developing the industrial base would be a big part of it. But for us, what would be really nice to see is even just have Canada have the share of the global space sector that it enjoys for the overall global economy. Right now, we're actually punching below our weight. When it comes to the global economy, we have a higher percentage than what we have for the global space sector. So an interesting recent report published by Deloitte actually makes the case that if you look at the exponential growth that's predicted for the space sector from now till 2040, that if we could just grab the share of the global space sector economy by 2040 that we enjoy right now of the overall economy, we'd have a $40 billion space sector in Canada, which would be amazing. And that's just really punching at our exact weight. So not too much of a stretch.
Okay, thank you for that. Ms. Beck, you mentioned the commercial integration cell. Brigadier General Adamson, the commander of 3 Canadian Space Division, mentioned that last week as well. What would you have the committee know and understand about the commercial integration cell so that we can help to support the industry in Canada?
Very, very briefly, please.
Yeah, so I think really it's going to be a forum to exchange information on threats relating to space operations. So for us, if we actually see anything that we feel is threatening either our current satellites or our future constellation, we will share that with DND. And likewise, whatever they feel is appropriate, they will share that information. And hopefully we can talk about some best practices, innovative ways to protect our fleet and telecommunication services just generally.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. Unfortunately, we have to bring this hour to a close. I would have preferred a more relaxed atmosphere where I'm not running such a hard clock, but it is what it is. But colleagues, I'd say that all of the conversations we've had about this have been very fascinating, and we may think of expanding this study. But with that, I want to thank each of you for your presence and your patience with us. And you've been a significant contributor to our study here. So with that, colleagues, ask the witnesses to leave, to be replaced by the new ones. We'll suspend for a minute or two while that happens.